On this week's episode, we're going to be talking with Ted Unangst of the OpenBSD team about their new signing infrastructure. After that, we've got a cool tutorial on how to run your own NTP server. So, of course, your news, feedback, and even the winner of our tutorial contest this week. It's going to be a big show today, guys. So stay tuned to BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 23, Time Signatures, recorded February 5th, 2014. Hi, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Hey, we're glad to have you guys with us today. Got another exciting show coming straight at you. So first up, this week's headlines. And leading this week's headlines, we have some foundation fundraising results. I guess they finally tabulated the 2013 results for the FreeBSD Foundation.
Yeah, part of it is, companies pledged to send the money before the end of the year, and then it takes a little while for banks to actually
wire transfers,
everything to get resolved.
Cetera.
But the final number for the FreeBSD Foundation for 2013 was $768,562.
Wow!
From 1,659 different donors.
That's cool.
Yep.
That is really cool.
I think that's a couple fewer donors than last year, but pretty close. It's good.
What was the total last year?
I think the total last year was similar amount as well.
Okay. Well, that's cool though. That's really neat to see.
Yep.
So they have a quote here. It says they've already started the 2014 fundraising efforts as well.
Yep. I see they have
at the end of
VMware signed up now, and we have TarSnap and a couple other places, plus lots of individual donors, which is good.
Okay. So they said as of right now, at the end of January, they're already just under 40,000. Their goal, again, is to raise $1 million. They're currently finalizing the 2014 budget, and they plan to publish both the 2013 financial report and the 2014 budget soon. So we'll have some new information to pass along, hopefully in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, their budgets and financial reports and everything are public, so you can go and look at the ones from previous and see where exactly all that money gets spent.
What they're doing. That's cool. Well, they also threw out a special thanks to all you guys out in the audience, the BSD Now listeners that contributed. The foundation was really glad that we were able to send some people their way, and they mentioned us on Facebook. So we appreciate that, and we're glad we could help out.
Every little bit helps, but just getting that number of donors up is worth almost as much as the money.
Yeah. Even if it's $5, just that incrementing that donor count is important.
Exactly.
Some organizations really want to see a large number of donors. So
and especially to keep their U.S. nonprofit status and so on.
Okay, what's the next thing?
The little picture there. Thanks from the whole foundation team and the mascot there.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll let you grab the next one then, Alan. What's next up this week?
Next week is OpenSSH 6.5 was released.
Oh, cool.
So they have the changelog here. And, it's a bunch of stuff we talked about. Added support for key exchange using that curve 25519 and the ED 25519 public key type, all that fun stuff.
That's considered more secure than DSA and ECDSA as well.
Yeah, so the new key exchange uses elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman mixed with Daniel Bernstein's curve 25519, which is now the default if both the client and the server support it, whereas before it was just an option. The ED 25519 public keys are now available for host keys and user keys. So, when you connect, you'll get the host key. If you only enable ED 25519 keys, all the compromised Linux boxes can't even attempt to log in.
Oh, well, just a neat little side effect, right?
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
That's cool. So they also have the new bcrypt private key type, which is supposedly 500 million times harder to brute force.
Yes,
so that's good.
We learned that live during the show last week from Colin Percival.
Yep. Well, that's cool. And then the Cha-Cha 20 Poly 1305 transport cipher is that builds an encrypted authenticated stream in one is also included.
Right. So that would be cool. Instead of using AES-256 and a Mac. Okay. And the portable version is ready, so that means it's available in the FreeBSD ports tree now under security/OpenSSH-portable.
How about in other BSDs? Is it available?
It's built into OpenBSD.
Sure.
And I don't know how their package system works, but the portable version also means it'll be available on Linux shortly.
Okay, well, cool. Looks like there's also a lot more bug fixes and features. So, of course, check out the full release notes or our interview with Damien a couple weeks back. And work has already kicked off on 6.6. Those guys don't take a break.
Yeah, and apparently 6.6 will be able to be used without OpenSSL, which is interesting.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that works. That's some neat stuff coming out. This is fun.
Yep.
Okay, next up, we have a really coolly titled news article here called Crazed Ferrets in a Berkeley Shower.
Yes.
I don't even know what to make of that.
Well, it was an original post Michael Lucas did back in the year 2000 as an essay for Linux.com about why he likes the BSD license better than the GPL. And what the world might look like today if BSD had been released under the GPL license instead of the BSD license.
Sure.
And he's since updated that for 2014 because it's been 14 years and a lot has changed and we know a lot more about what's happening and what the
well, kind of in response to some of the recent comments from Richard Stallman, raging a little bit against Clang and LLVM,
stuff like that,
small tier, right?
Exactly. So yeah, he's got a good post over here and it kind of explains the differences and why, sure, you can like the GPL, but you must admit that the BSD license has advantages, especially in certain cases.
Sure, definitely.
And that,
Well, it's basically one of those places, if you're somebody who loves getting into license arguments, go here, read this. It'll give you lots of good ammo. Michael Lucas is a great writer anyway, so you just got to check it out for that alone. Fun guy.
Yep.
So the takeaway is BSD is about making the world a better place for everyone.
Right. Whereas GPL is about making sure the code stays open. Which one sounds like a loftier goal?
Okay, next up we have some more OpenBSD information here. OpenBSD on BeagleBone Black. So I guess those are cheap little ARM devices, similar, say, to your Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, except for their ARM v7, which is newer.
Oh, nice. So we have a link to a blog post here about installing OpenBSD on the BBB from our guest today. Cool. He describes it as everything I wish I knew before installing the newly renamed ARM v7 port on a BeagleBone Black. It talks about the whole process, details some different storage options, some workarounds for problems you may run into if you're trying to get one set up. And this is actually something really cool. I mean, a great weekend project or even a teaching experience if you're showing somebody getting them onto ARM for the first time. But if you're interested in smaller embedded devices, great way to get started in that field.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's the end of the weekly news roundup. But of course, now we would like to mention our sponsor for this week's episode, IX Systems.
Yes.
So what do we got from them this week, Alan?
Well, as you know, they make high-end hardware that you can buy. We've seen that they make really high-end hardware, like the Megacore machine they did for the FreeBSD Foundation.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a little bit before, but that's 4 CPUs, each 10 cores. So in total, it's 80 cores, and like a terabyte of RAM and 6 half-terabyte SSDs and dual power supplies and all that stuff. But they also make smaller systems, right? You can get like your FreeNAS Mini, little $700 or $800 machine to build a nice little NAS that sits under your desk. You probably don't want the Megacore machine running in your bedroom. It might be a little loud. But FreeNAS Mini is not. So they do the whole range of hardware, and it's all the latest and greatest Intel processors. Get your i3 for a low-end i3 for your FreeNAS, or
all the way up to the high-end Xeons.
Yeah, to the Xeons that you can't buy in a store because they're only used by people who are doing serious business.
That's right. Yep. So they have a neat link here we'll be able to put in the show notes afterwards, talking about that Megacore system they put out. I guess they posted this on February 4th, so just yesterday. So that is really cool. Check it out. And of course, there's a couple pictures there, which are neat.
Yeah. Oh, and apparently they're going to run Beehive on it with all 80 cores. So that's cool.
Oh, dang, nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
We've been using Beehive in production. It's been going very well. But yeah, IX is great. And so if you need hardware for anything to do with a server, even if you're not running FreeBSD, but
they can build it.
Yes, they build great hardware, and the testing, right? They have this QA process where they pound on the server for 3 days before they ship it to you, so that when you get it, you know it's going to work.
Yeah. Their burn-in was a little bit more in depth than just hitting the power button and seeing if it posts. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Most times when you buy
You're
something,
gonna thrash your machine, make sure it works.
Yeah, they're specially designed to make sure that, you know, it's like we've learned from hard drive study after hard drive study that if a disk is going to fail, it's going to be in the first, you know, like 30 hours and things like that. And, you know, if they pound on it for that and it survives, that means the chance that that drive is going to go bad on you is now gone down by like 40%. You know, it means that disk is most likely going to last you the 5 years instead of not. Because there's nothing more frustrating than getting a brand new server, get it in production, get everything set up, and then it conks out.
All that time wasted, and you get to send it. Yeah.
Or worse, you know, you get it, you unpack it, and it doesn't work. It's like, yeah. With IX, that doesn't happen because they take the time to test it first. And
also, we'll mention they just pushed out a new FreeNAS 9.21 release candidate this last week. So we'll have a link in the show notes to that as well.
And I might be mistaken, but that might be coming out of release candidate soon. I saw a big upload go out to the master FTP site like 2 hours ago.
Oh, I spoiled the surprise, Alan. Well, that's cool, though. So maybe if you guys hunt around, you can find that somewhere.
Or maybe it's just release candidate 2 or something. I don't know. But I saw something go by.
Okay, well, cool.
But yeah, so if you would like to find out more on whether you're looking for a tiny thing to build a NAS or if you're filling a rack with hardware, let's go to ixsystems.com/BSD Now.
Excellent. Well, cool. We'll be back in just a moment with Ted for our interview today. We're joined today by Ted Unangst, who's from the OpenBSD project. Ted's responsible for some of the OpenBSD Signify infrastructure. So glad to have you on the show today, Ted. Thanks for coming on.
Yes. Hello. Glad to be here.
Cool. So go ahead and just give us a little bit about yourself, background. How did you get involved with BSD?
Okay. So starting around the year 2000, long ago, I was starting in college and fooling around with a bunch of different operating systems. And then kind of just OpenBSD felt like a better fit for me. It did what I wanted it to do, and I didn't have too much trouble with it. And unlike a particular Linux distro that I tried at the time, it didn't implode under my abuse. So a couple years later, I was picking up programming and also wanted to tinker with it and start fixing things. And so it's actually been 11 years now that I've been a official OpenBSD developer.
Oh, cool.
So was there something in particular that got you your commit bit and how you became an OpenBSD committer?
I think it may have been a large series of diffs to fix locking in the VFS layer, which many a OpenBSD developer has bled upon.
Yeah, that's not exactly beginner stuff.
I started on something easy, you know?
So I think part of it was they figured if they gave me an account, they could control somewhat the diffs I was sending, because as an outsider, I was just bombing them with these enormous diffs. Sure. So once I actually started committing, I worked on a number of smaller issues instead of the VFS layer, but I've done some damage there as well.
So what is your current role at the project?
I work on a lot of things, and I suppose it's the intersection of what I want to work on and what I'm allowed to work on. I do a lot of work or would like to do a lot of work in like the realm of file systems and just general kernel area, memory management. There's a couple userland programs which I've done a fair bit of work on. There's not really anything that I specialize in, and there aren't, but mostly I just stick to the source tree. Like I don't really do a lot of work in X or in the ports tree.
Right.
Sure. So for the main topic today, though, first tell us, how do we pronounce it? It's Signify, right?
That's right, Signify.
Cool.
And so what's the story behind this new tool? What does it do?
Okay, so Signify is just a very simple tool that allows you to cryptographically sign and verify a file. So this is akin to something that you might use PGP or GPG for, although it doesn't have any of the encryption facilities that those tools do. The one and only thing that it can do is create a signature for a file and then later verify that the signature matches, such that the file has not been tampered with. And so we are using this in OpenBSD now, starting with the 5.5 release to sign the base release and also all of the third-party packages that we're going to ship.
Well, how long has this been in development, and who's all working on it?
So it's been in development since December 21st. And I would say I am the primary developer of Signify itself, although Mark Espy is the package utilities author, and so he wrote all of the code to sign like all of the plumbing code and package add to verify the signatures. And the installer bits were, I believe, written by Alexander Hall. And so I was in the position where, and then Theo is also, of course, going to be using it to actually sign the releases.
Right. Sure.
And I guess I'm in a position of having written the tool and designed the interface, but I don't have to use it.
Right.
So this led to some friction, we'll say, in the early days where I had my ideas about how the tool should be used, but of course I didn't actually have to use it. And so I was inflicting my harsh reality on everyone else. And so they kind of came back, and we've made some changes to the interface to make it a little easier for them to use.
Sure.
Now, why do we want to sign releases? That's a great question, and actually, I don't officially know. I never asked. But I think we can probably all speculate, though your speculation would be as well-informed as mine. So we'll leave it at that. But you know, the end result here is we want to ensure that the releases that are built by Theo and some of the other architecture maintainers are the exact same binaries that you install in your system.
Right. So I guess that raises the tangential question: why haven't things been signed up until now?
That's actually almost an easier question. And the answer is it's a lot of work. Writing the Signify, which is the part that I had to do, was definitely the easiest part of the whole process. Just as one example, within, I think, 6 hours of committing our first test key, we had to overwrite it and commit a second public test key because we lost the corresponding private key.
Oops.
Now, that's obviously something you don't want to do in production. And so there's a lot of these things that you just can't ever screw up or the whole system falls apart. And we didn't want to be, and so it's a lot of work and stress just kind of dealing with that. For the last couple releases now, for instance, the OpenBSD snapshots come out, and the SHA-256 file, which accompanies them, has been checked by the installer, but a lot of the times you get checksum mismatches, particularly with the X sets, because the SHA file and the X sets are built on different machines at different times by different people, and then they kind of trickle out over rsync to FTP, and then there's just timing issues where you can get mismatched or partially synced sets.
Yeah, we had that.
And so the harder and more strictly you enforce all these checksums match and the cryptographic signatures match, the more careful you have to be about the build process, where now the X sets have to be built on one machine, but then they have to be copied onto the signing machine before they can be published, so that they can be signed properly and then copied out. So it adds another step. It slows things down a little bit.
Sure.
And I think also the tools, there was like a major part of this was the bootstrapping issue, where if you're installing or upgrading OpenBSD, I think the way a lot of other projects do this is you download a giant ISO and then you run GPG, verify that the ISO is correct, and then you boot the ISO and install. But looking at the FTP traffic that OpenBSD gets, the majority of our users are actually just downloading the RAM disk kernel, booting that, and then doing a net install from an FTP site. And so whatever tool we were going to use to verify that the sets being downloaded were correct needed to be part of that RAM disk, because users weren't verifying the bulk of the data themselves.
Right.
Sure.
And yeah, if you're going to check something against a public key, where do you get the public key from so that it isn't the right one, right?
Yeah. And so that's actually something that we're still in the process of sorting out. So all the public keys are checked into our source repository. And I think currently they're still just the test keys. They're identified, they say test in them. The official keys for 5.5 have not been generated yet. But when they are, I think also we'll send out an email with them. And so then they'll be, massively duplicated and published on all of the mailing list archives.
Sure.
But we are deliberately not using any sort of public key infrastructure or trust chains. So we're not going to have keys signed by keys, and so there's just going to be one key. You got to get that one pub key first somehow, and for us, that's just going to be a matter of, if we put it in enough places, it's going to be hard to tamper with.
Yep.
Yeah. So are you going to be using this to sign your sets, ISOs, patches, and packages, or only some set of that?
Yes. So
good answer.
the way it currently works for the OpenBSD releases is we are publishing a SHA-256.sig file, which is a signed list of checksums of all the other files.
Oh, okay.
Such as base55 TGZ, com55 TGZ, and all the other sets. And then I don't know actually I think the situation with the ISO is a little different. There's some complications there, where trying to get the signed checksum file into the ISO after the ISO was built is very complicated. That's still kind of work in progress. But I think we'll probably just publish just a separate signature for just the ISO as well. So that's base. That's all signed with one key, which is under Theo's control, and I'm not sure who else. For the record, I do not have access to any of the signing keys, so I can't do any of this on my own. All the packages are going to be signed. So the packages also have a checksum list of all the files in the package. And so what we are doing is we're adding a checksum we're adding a signature of the checksum file. And that gets stuck in each package. So every package is completely independent. That was also a necessity because it's some number of terabytes of data, and we can never get a completely synced set on an FTP site, and so publishing one checksum for that doesn't work.
Right.
And then there's a third key, which is used for the firmware packages, because the firmware packages are a little bit differently and they're distributed differently. And so we're using a third key, which I think Stuart Henderson controls for that one.
Cool. So what about like source.targetgz and sys.targetgz? Will those be signed or?
I don't know. So far we have been mostly concerned with just the releases. I think most people get their source probably from CVS, and so you're using SSH transport already for that.
Right.
Certainly, I think whatever is not currently being signed, I would like to say it would be better if we did sign it. And I don't think there's any reason why we would deliberately choose not to sign, for instance, the source, or also there's also the ports tarball on the FTP sites. I think the only reason that they're not currently signed is going back to the process, they get generated by somebody, and so and then uploaded, and I think they would probably be signed with the key that Theo has, but Theo is not currently the person uploading those files.
Right.
So I think for an official release, he will probably sign them. I don't know. Now I'm creating more work for him as we speak here. So
Of course.
I don't want to dig myself in too deep.
Well, speaking of Theo, what was it that happened that convinced him to allow this, and who do we have to thank for this?
Like I said, I don't know. He sent me an email asking me to look into tools that we could use, like what would be necessary to sign releases, but he did not indicate a motive. So, we can, I guess, imagine, what's happened in the last, year or so.
News events and various stuff.
But,
Well, we'll track him down and ask him next time we run into him at a conference.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I'm sure, he will have better commentary on the situation than I do.
Okay.
So how will the public keys be distributed for this? I guess you said the mailing list?
Right. We are going to, so they're all checked into base. So for upgrades, and the plan is to generate the 5.6 key and install that with the 5.5 release. So once you get 5.5 installed somehow, you will already have the key for 5.6, which you can then use to bootstrap the RAM disk kernel or whatever you need to download 5.6 and so forth moving forward. The only issue really is 5.5, the first release, or if you're like a newcomer, a new user to installing OpenBSD, you need to get the new key somehow. And so I think we put it on the website, put it on the FTP site, send out a mail. I think that's also part of the issue of why this hasn't been done before, is you have this massive, it's not really a massive problem, you have a bootstrap problem, and trying to assert that you can get that initial key reliably is really almost on par with getting the rest of OpenBSD reliably.
Yeah, I know there was a similar argument about whether or not the PGP keys for everybody should be in the printed version of the FreeBSD handbook, as that would be an easier way to get them. Like, really, you want to type out PGP public keys from the piece of paper?
Yeah, well, that's actually one great thing about Signify is the public keys are extremely small.
Right.
So the raw public key is actually only 32 bytes.
Oh, okay.
And so that's property of we're using the ED25519 crypto algorithm, which is, I think it's like a special case of the Curve 25519 by DJB.
Yep.
And so with a 32-byte key, we were talking, we could probably print it on like T-shirts, for instance, and in a reasonable font size such that you actually can type these keys in by hand, or we could, you can SMS it to a friend. You can put it on Twitter.
It could be on
lots of places.
It could be on the
just now.
the CD sets, a
Yeah.
little package that you get and things like that. Cool.
So you kind of touched on this, but you guys planning on doing rotation and re-signing for every release, or just using one key from here on out?
Yes. So we are planning on using a different set of keys. So there's 3 keys. So there will be 3 keys for each release.
Okay.
And then those keys will only be used for that release. And I think presumably the snapshots up till the version change afterwards. Or we might use, actually, I'm not sure which key we're going to use for the snapshots, because I think part of it is in order to keep the release key safe, it's going to be, used once and then locked in a drawer.
Right. And so,
but yes, the plan is that we're every key or every release is going to have a separate key.
So that'll work like you did with the first one, where on 5.6 it'll bootstrap the 5.7 key.
That's right. And so I think worst case, if you are upgrading and you're skipping releases, you may conceivably have to download several of the Etsy sets to get the keys at a minimum in order to bootstrap. So the basically the chain is going to be that every release has the next key in it, and then which you can use to verify the next release.
Right. So could you give us a quick run through of how the verification process will work for, say, like an errata patch?
Yeah, sure. So I think we will probably, actually I haven't thought too much about the errata patches, but the way the Signify works, it has 2 modes. One is it can create a signature file. So you'll have patch, and then you'll have patch.sig. Additionally, which is what we're actually using in the base release and for the installer with the SHA-256 file, is it can embed the message data after the signature. And so I imagine what a patch would look like is, so the Signify signature is just 2 text lines. So the first 2 lines of the file can be the Signify signature, and then the rest of the file will be the patch data. And then, so we'll publish those instead of the regular patches. And then when you download it, you run, instead of just running patch, you run Signify and then pipe the output to patch, which will then apply the patch for you, but only if it verifies.
That seems pretty straightforward.
Right, and you can actually look at the patch. One of the things is the Signify files, the sign file is unmodified after the first 2 lines, and so you can open it in a text editor and review the patch easily enough without having to actually extract it.
Cool. So how can people get involved and help test this? And it sounds like it is planned to go into 5.5.
So, well, the snapshots using all of this are currently live. i386 and AMD64 would be the main ones. Some of the other architectures, I think almost all the snapshots that are uploaded should have all of the working bits.
Sure.
Some of the packages, snapshots, however, are lagging behind and are not there yet. But there's a example in the Signify man page, which will help you bootstrap by checking the BSD RD kernel, the RAM disk. And so You just follow the example in the bottom of the man page, and that will get you a signed, verified BSD RD RAM disk that you can boot. And then the next time, that RAM disk kernel itself has the public key in it for the 5.5 snapshots, and so it can do a net install and verify everything that it downloads. The one gotcha that we have right now is you need a home partition, and it needs to be a separate partition, and it needs to have enough space to download all of the sets too. The reason we do that is because we need to verify the set before we pipe it through tar. So, for example, the old installer used to just pipe the output of FTP directly into tar and didn't require any additional disk space. Unfortunately, we can't verify a file as it goes. We need to, we don't want to be piping a not yet verified file through to tar, only to then later discover that it was invalid after you've already overwritten all the stuff in your file system.
Right. Yeah.
And so the installer is going to go through, I think, some iterations here, but it needs enough temporary space to save all of the sets. And currently, I think it was decided just to use /home, figuring that would have enough disk space on it if it existed. And if it doesn't exist, then we don't know where to put the sets. We're not sure which of your partitions might have enough disk space on it. And so currently, I think this probably affects some people. If you have a Socrus install, you won't be able to verify a network install because you probably don't have a separate home partition, or it's going to be really tiny. The workaround for that is to download all the sets ahead of time, and then you can install from local disk. And then the installer is smart enough to realize that it doesn't have to copy the files before it verifies them.
Cool. So just another question I guess you probably weren't expecting. Looking through some stuff, I noticed that you were the guy that looked at porting ZFS to OpenBSD.
Yes.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts on that and maybe where it went?
Yeah. So I agree with a lot of the ZFS features. I think combining the RAID layer and the file system layer gains you a lot of advantages. The internal checksumming that it does is fantastic because it applies the checksumming at the layer that actually matters, which is basically the user data layer, where when you start pushing that down onto RAID controllers, they start lying to you, and you don't know that they're lying because they have very insidious ways of lying, such that all your data looks correct, and then all of a sudden, something
it's not.
Yeah, a bit flips, and all of a sudden, that spare disk that you thought you were mirroring to actually has nothing on it.
Yep.
And so I think it has a lot of great advantages like that, where it verifies that all the data is correct, and it can do some really smart things about rebuilding and striping. So I would love to have something like it. The issue with ZFS and OpenBSD, working all the way right from the start, it's a no-go just because of the license. The CDDL license is not considered free by OpenBSD standards. So that just, it's done at that point. Although on a technical level, it's a massive amount of code. And so I took a look at how the FreeBSD port works, and it turns out that you end up with a lot of duplicated primitives and like the concurrency primitives and mutexes and stuff that ZFS is using come from Solaris, and so it's almost like running a Solaris kernel, in your FreeBSD kernel, which bringing that into OpenBSD is it's so much code. And we don't have the people necessarily to be looking at it full time and digging into the issues that inevitably arise where, hey, it works great until it doesn't. And then you have to debug it, and suddenly you have hundreds of thousands of lines of code to debug, and it's all kind of written in a foreign style because it came from some other operating system. So,
right.
I don't think, but I guess the good news is we have Fuse now. So I think if somebody wanted to, the ZFS Fuse port could be tried. I haven't tried it. And I don't know that anybody has, but I know for a while that was how people were running ZFS on Linux, for instance, I think. So, that'd be the first thing. If I were a ZFS enthusiast, that would be my first option right now.
Okay, so it's New Year's Eve. You're counting down the seconds to midnight with all your other lonely friends on IRC. But wait, you start celebrating 5 seconds before their clocks hit midnight. Everyone laughs at you. What an embarrassing situation. No, this isn't an episode of The Big Bang Theory, although it probably should be. But today we're going to discuss how we can make it so you don't have to worry about that happening. If you have your clock synced with a network time protocol server, we can fix this. This tutorial is going to show you how to both keep your client machine synced as well as how to run your own NTP server. You can even help out the community by running a public one. Currently, there's 2 main NTP daemons, or NTPD programs to choose from. We won't be detailing how to use GPS devices, only the software. A big reminder, whichever implementation you use, please keep it up to date. Don't let security flaws turn your server into a bot for DDoS attacks. So what's the first one we're looking at here, Alan?
That's been a big problem recently is the default configuration. Someone found there's a certain command that nobody ever used that if used incorrectly could cause machines to start sending out traffic. So you send a spoofed UDP packet, and then time server would then reply with a large message to the fake source address, allowing a bunch of machines with small connections to flood an NTP server and cause it to send out a huge amount of data to a target. It's like,
bottom line, that's bad.
Yeah, server's going fine, and all of a sudden it's sending a gigabit a second for no reason. I was like, what's up with that? So anyway, if we take a look at our ntp.conf, this is a 9.2, so it actually needs a little bit of love here. So in the config, we'll add these new restrict lines that were in the recent security advisory. It tells you how to fix your time server. But basically, we designate a couple of servers. In this case, ntp.org runs a pool specifically for FreeBSD servers. So 0, 1, and 2.freebsd.pool.ntp.org. So that tells the pool where to get your NTP servers from. Or you can also use 0, 1, and 2. Whatever your country code is, like CA for Canada, .pool.ntp.org to get local time servers. And then we'll apply some restrictions so that we'll only accept time information from the people who we expect, and we'll strict so that we'll only answer queries coming from localhost. Right? We don't want to allow people on our LAN to ask us for time, or more importantly, we don't want to let people on the internet ask us what time it is, because they will do that, and that will be bad. So there's a bunch of different pools, but you can look at the different ones. And then, so now if we just do service ntpd, if we edit our rc.conf and make sure that we have ntpd enable equals yes, then when we start ntpd, we'll have a server. And we see that my time is correct. Now, if we wanted to make a server on the LAN, we have to make a couple of changes to that. to allow machines to connect to our NTP server or to query our NTP server. So if we pull up the config file again, we get this handily as a patch in the show notes. You can see that what we'll do is we'll change this line about restricting who can talk to us, and we'll add
max poll 8.
We'll set the IP address and the net mask, or subnet and net mask, that we want to allow to make queries to our server.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way we'll have the stuff we need. And if you're going to run it as a server, make sure you sync your clock first as well, as it says in the tutorial. So now if we restart, now our NTP daemon will be accessible over our LAN, so another machine can now pull time from this machine. So instead of having, if you have 100 machines on a LAN, instead of having them all go out to the internet and ask for the time all the time, you can pull it into one machine or two and then distribute that inside your LAN that way. And then that's less internet traffic and less load on the public NTP servers. So it's public service to do that. And then you can also add the NTPD sync on start to your rc.conf, and that way it'll adjust the time. No matter normally NTP will try to walk the time to the right one, but after boot up, if you want it to set the time immediately, that can be especially important if you're using older hardware where the CMOS battery has died, and if it loses power, it forgets what time it is.
Yep.
Or if you're on a type of machine that just doesn't have the ability to remember the time when it's powered off, like I think a Raspberry Pi. When it's powered off, there's no battery, so there's no way for it to remember the time. So when you boot it up, you have to sync the time, otherwise it's years out of date. Now, you also have to open port 123 on your firewall to allow the machines to talk to the NP server or to the internet if you're doing public. Specifically, if you're doing public, you want to make sure that you specify a max poll so that individual addresses can't ask you for the time more than so many times a second, because that's how a DDoS would work. So we just put max poll 8. That will restrict that. And then if we restart, now we have a public-facing NTP server.
That's pretty stinking easy.
Yep. Now, if we want to take a quick switch, we'll switch over to an OpenBSD box and look at using OpenNTPD, which is a different implementation of the time server. Originally released November 1st of 2004, OpenNTPD is a NTP daemon from the OpenBSD project. Due to security, licensing, and configuration concerns, they wrote their own rather than using the standard ISC one. I think it was one of the first daemons that Henning Brouwer put the privilege separation concept into.
That's neat.
Yeah, so their goals were to be as secure as possible, to code carefully, do strict validation checks, especially in the network input path, and use bounded buffer operations and things like that. And it uses privilege separation so that if something were to happen, that the damage would be mitigated by the privilege separation. It also provides a very lean implementation, sufficient for the majority, doesn't have quite all the features, but as we found out, some of those obscure use cases weren't used enough or weren't bounded enough that they end up being used in this denial of service attack, whereas OpenNTPD just doesn't implement that obscure command. So there's also a portable version, so you can install OpenNTPD from FreeBSD ports or NetBSD's package source. It was one of the options to mitigate the the denial of service thing when the security advisory came out. It was like either install or even newer NTPD from ports, install OpenNTPD, or make the changes required to your configuration file. So anyway, if we take a look at the ntpd.conf on an OpenBSD machine, instead of about 3 pages, you can see that the config file is literally 5 lines of code with comments to tell you what they're for. And it tells you specify the servers to pull the information from, whether you want it to listen on the network or not. By default, it doesn't listen on the network at all. It just runs and changes your local clock.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also specify sensors where it can use to get information about timing.
That's cool.
Yeah, so the default configuration only has one uncommented line by default, which is just the servers to pull the time from.
Mm-hmm.
So, we could change that and go down here and comment that out and put in servers time.nist.gov or time.nrc.ca, or in the tutorial it's got time.apple.com and so on. Now, if you want to make it available on the network, you could uncomment this listen on star and it'll listen on all network interfaces. Or more likely, you could put just the network address you want it to listen on. Right? So now it'll only listen on that IP address, or the actual IP address on my machine.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. And now it'll only listen to connections coming in on that address. Now, if you want it to start, if we just go to our rc.conf, the local, and we can see we have our NTPD flags set to none. So that will start it during install.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do NTPD -s, it'll launch as a server. If you do this, we don't. We're on 5.4, so this other part of the tutorial doesn't quite work yet. But it reports information about what's happening. So it'll tell you the time servers it's connected to and how it's syncing with them. Which is very useful information to have, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So now, with it listening on the network, you can just point your clients at the IP address you configured your NTPD to listen on, and now you have a time server. Now, to be a public time server, there's a number of requirements for adding your NTP server to the official pools. So if you go to the URL ntp.org that we have in the tutorial, it describes them. If you're doing a public-facing NTP server, you have to avoid using pool.ntp.org for your configuration. Instead, you can use a higher stratum of server, which are more accurate, but the idea is that they only answer requests to other time servers, not to the general public, so that they're not overloaded, right?
Makes sense.
So you have these tiers. You have very accurate clocks, and then pretty accurate clocks, and then the servers that you get your time from. And so if you're going to run a time server, you should move up you should be querying a server that's at a higher stratum than you, so that you're not increasing the error all the time by being so many hops away from the source of the correct time. It's also generally recommended you have 5 or more sources that you're averaging to get very accurate time. There's also a mailing list you can join if you're running a time server, because you probably are interested in information that is of interest to people running time servers.
Okay, next up, our weekly news roundup. First up, we got some information about getting started with FreeBSD. So this is kind of cool. We got a new video and blog series about getting started, of course, with FreeBSD. The author's been a fan since the 90s and says he's installed it on every server he's worked with. So he's going to be talking a little bit about that, mention some of the advantages of BSD over Linux, how to approach explaining these to new users. And then the first video is going to be, of course, installation. Then he goes on to packages and other topics. So far, he's up to 4 videos. So definitely check out the link in the show notes post show today.
Yeah, it talks about some of the advantages of FreeBSD, like ZFS and having it sooner rather than later, jails, the reliability, the stable API, the network stack, and so on. And yeah, it's got a whole series of videos on here, and it looks pretty interesting.
That's cool. Good getting your feet wet experience with the FreeBSD.
Yes, and I recognize the face now as someone who was asking me questions about ZFS on Twitter.
Oh, okay.
So I imagine he's going to maybe be talking about badmin a little bit in one of those videos. Because that's the kind of stuff he was asking about.
Cool. Well, what we got next, Alan?
Next is the hackathon report from, I think it was New Zealand they did it in. So KWR at openbsd.org talks about his fixes for DHCP and introduction of something for doing MBR disk labels. Specifically, MBR disks that have non-512 byte sectors, which is an interesting approach. Since
so I guess
OpenBSD isn't using GPT, they're still sticking with MBR, so they've had to come up with interesting stuff.
Some workarounds to make that work. Well, cool. It looks like it's just a good summary. Goes into detail on how they did all that.
He says, due to interesting flight scheduling issues, he got to spend 12 hours in the Vancouver airport lounge, which meant he spent those 12 hours starting the hackathon early by himself. That's how some of the greatest work gets done.
Right, sitting in the airport. Nice.
Or on the airplane, right? I wrote the first version of the new FreeBSD installer ZFS stuff. I wrote on the airplane between Toronto and Germany on my way to Malta.
Yep. Well, cool. Well, next up, we have some information. A couple weeks back, we had some feedback about running X in a jail. Well, looks like we had a commit, and now you can do that.
Yep.
So we got a new tunable option, which lets jails access dev kman and some other similar device nodes, along with a change to DRM. This allows you to run a full X11 in a FreeBSD jail. This is really slick.
Yep. So I'll have to add a link to that. It looks like it might get reverted, actually.
Oh, no. Yeah. Somebody not like it?
Robert Watson.
Oh,
well specifically when you allow a jail access to KMEM, it allows the jail to escape being in a jail.
Well, sure.
Yeah. Now, it depends what your goal with being in a jail is, right? If the goal of putting X in the jail is just a separate package space and a separate, directory and so on, then it still works. But if it's basically negates all of the security.
Sure. So you need like an unsecure jail option or something. And it's just a abstracted base or something.
Right. And at the same time, this setting, the allowed KMEM, only applies to individual jails. So you can have an X jail that's insecure while still having all your other jails still be secure. So there's some talk back and forth on the mailing list, and I'll drop a link to the mailing list in there, and we'll see what happens with that. We'll keep an eye on it because
we'll keep you posted and let you know if that gets yanked out or tweaked and put in.
Because there's probably a couple of useful use cases for that, for a couple different things.
Cool.
Especially, I wonder about being able to run 2 different X's just to try them and stuff like that.
Yeah, that would definitely. There's just some interesting things you could see people running with this and coming up with some cool use cases.
Well, also especially, we did that one about running an app in a jail and then using VNC for it or something like that. But if you could put the whole X in a jail and allow people to VNC in, that could be all kinds of interesting things.
The way we did our jails, our X jails, port jails we call them, it's you're still running X on your host outside the jail, but then the apps inside have access to some of the sockets and whatnot, so you can launch Firefox in the jail and it connects you right to your screen. That's halfway, but this sounds like a lot cooler thing they can do.
Yep.
Cool. So check out our jail tutorial and the jailed VNC tutorial. We'll have some links to that in the show notes afterwards.
Yep.
So next up, we have our PCBSD Weekly Digest. So we did announce 10.0 Joule Edition finally was released last week. So yes, thank you everyone who worked so hard to make that happen. AMD graphics are now officially supported with all the changes in FreeBSD 10 and porting that over. GNOME 3 Mate Cinnamon desktops are available. So we have some new cool stuff you can play with. We also have a link. PCBSD got a mention in eWeek just a couple days ago. Cool. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, neat to see that popping up. So again, everyone go ahead and grab it and let us know what you think. We're glad to finally have it out the door. Okay, next up, we got our feedback from you guys in the audience, and our first question this week is from Justin, who sends us some information about a ZFS question we had earlier.
Yeah,
so what's he saying?
So I said on episode 22, about an hour and 9 minutes in, I was responding to a question about using ZFS on USB as a portable file system to move between operating systems. Now that you can mount ZFS in Linux and FreeBSD and even to some degree on a Mac. And I said one of the issues is creating a pool that's backwards compatible enough, an old enough version that'll work on all of those different things. And I said I wasn't sure how you could create a pool with an older version, right? Because normally when you do zpool create, it creates the newest.
Just the default that's on there, yeah.
Yeah, but if you do zpool create -0 version equals 15, it'll create an old Solaris 11 compatible zpool. You probably don't want to go back that far, but
Sure,
if you have to
28 or something.
yeah, if you have to support Solaris, you do actually. So yeah, looking at V28, you could make a pool that would be compatible. I don't know which version you have to use to be compatible with a Mac, but that could definitely be useful. And the -O version gives you the file system version, although that's been sitting up for quite a long time, and I don't know that you'd ever have to go back older than that. But you are able to do that now. Well, you've always been able to do that, and it's very useful. So thank you for Justin for clarifying how to do that.
Oh, that's nice. Cool. Okay, next up, we have something from Daniel this week. He wrote us some weeks ago, actually, about migrating from Ubuntu to FreeBSD and ZFS. He just wanted to thank us for all the help. He installed ZFS on Linux on Ubuntu, formatted the disks with ZFS over there, and he moved all the data to them, and then installed FreeBSD and ported the disks, and guess what? It just worked. So he just wanted to share his journey, that it was a fun one, and keep up the good work we're doing. So thank you so much for responding, Daniel. We're glad to hear that worked for you, and you're able to make that go. And for those who didn't catch that a couple weeks back, he basically used ZFS between Linux and FreeBSD and was able to migrate pretty painlessly.
Yeah, so he had a Linux system and wanted to migrate to FreeBSD, but he needed a file system that would be usable by both. And now ZFS is quickly becoming that with support in Linux, FreeBSD, and Illumos. It also just means that, if you build a pool, you're going to be able to work on it on whatever machine happens to be there.
Yeah, multiple operating system. That's cool.
So yeah, OpenZFS is great, and we're looking forward to a bright, happy future with that.
Well, cool. So next up, we have something from Martin, and he's asking about FreeNAS. So what's he got going on here?
A FreeNAS box that he's put together, a nice little E3 system, and he's having problems mapping his girlfriend's Windows username to his FreeNAS box. In particular, the problem seems to be that his girlfriend's name has accented letters in it, which causes all kinds of fun.
Yeah. That's always interesting.
He says he uses Linux, although he's looking at trying PCBSD 10 when it comes out. This email's a couple of weeks old, I think. But he said NFS works fine for him from his Linux box to his FreeNAS, but his girlfriend uses Windows 7, and her username, Guinevere with the accent on the E there, is having trouble because creating that same username on FreeNAS so it matches is causing him problems. He already tried the username map option in the global section of Samba to mangle that to a useful username or a simple username, but he's wondering if anybody has any tips on making that work.
He says also he was going to post this to the FreeNAS group as a bug feature request right after this email. So if this is a couple weeks old, Martin, if you're still out there, definitely let us know if they've already fixed it or found a workaround too. If you write in with a success story, we'll be glad to share that and pass it along.
If anybody else has an idea of how to deal with usernames with non-ASCII characters in them, like E's with accents on them and stuff, it's luckily something I've never personally had to deal with. And so hopefully somebody will be able to come up with an answer for that, get that sorted out.
Okay.
Better than in the chat room, Gurr says that you need to just get, it's too bad, but you have to get a new girlfriend.
There's your problem.
Yeah. So
cool.
next up,
next up we got Alex.
Yes.
He's asking about a BSD on Raspberry Pis. So he said one of the area ham radio groups has started focusing on the Raspberry Pi. Although he found mention of FreeBSD and NetBSD being ported to the Pi, he can't find any images. So any suggestions so that I can bring them that up next time they meet? So the images are out there, Alan. Do you remember how old they are, though?
There are some old ones, but there are some brand new ones as well.
Okay, so there's some newer ones.
They're kind of hidden, but Glenn Barber, who was one of our guests early on and is the FreeBSD release engineer, he has a FreeBSD 10 release Raspberry Pi image from January 25th, which is not even like 2 weeks old yet.
Yeah.
So I will drop the link to that in our show notes for everybody. And Glenn will probably be cursing at me. It's like, those are just for testing.
Well,
unofficial.
We will put that caveat on. They are for testing.
FreeBSD Raspberry Pi images. There's also snapshots of FreeBSD 11 current on there as well, and I imagine 10 stable will get updated on some kind of cycle. And so you'll be able to track all the latest fixes for the Raspberry Pi stuff. I know he's also working on, I think, a BeagleBone and a couple other platforms. So nice. We're hoping to have nice images for a lot of those little ARM devices from FreeBSD. So that'll be great.
Some point they'll be made official and up on the site and all that. So that's cool. He also had a secondary question. He's been trying to experiment with FreeBSD 10 on Hyper-V to practice configuring ZFS. He created a VM with 3 SCSIs and created what should be a RAID Z1 configuration using ZFS on root. Install X normally, but on reboot he's getting a boot failure, reboot or select proper root device, insert boot media, etc. Any ideas what that one is, Alan? It sounds like he's in the default install.
Set it. If you used the installer thing I built, it should work. Make sure you're using GPT if you can instead of MBR, although I don't know how Hyper-V supports that. But yeah, it sounds like the boot sector is not getting written properly. You might have to fall back to creating the root on ZFS manually using the instructions off the FreeBSD wiki to make sure that you're getting the boot sector installed right.
Okay, next up we got James. Question about packages and ports. What's this one, Alan?
So James says he installed FreeBSD 10 on his file server over the weekend, taking the opportunity to do a complete reinstall and resetup with root on ZFS, as well as use the package tool, the new package ng system. He says he likes package, but he's confused about how to keep packages installed through package and others installed from ports, with changed compile time options and so on, both up to date on a machine. How do I tell package to leave my ports alone? And how do I tell portmaster to leave my packages alone? And so on and so forth. So to have package leave your stuff alone, there's a couple of different ways. PKG lock will lock a package so it can't be modified until you unlock it. And then you can also use PKG annotate to leave a reminder or notes, instructions about how to rebuild the port or whatever. Although annotate also has the option of a specific field, and you can you can lock packages to certain repositories because package supports multiple repositories. For example, I have the PCBSD repository on my my file server, but I also have my own repository, but my own repository only has like 200 packages in it. So I can lock certain packages to be from my repository. So when I do a PKG upgrade, it'll only ever pull those from my repository. Even if the version of my repository is older than the version in the PCBSD repository, because I haven't rebuilt mine yet or whatever. So I'll add the command for that to the show notes as well, but I think it's package annotate and then something repository and then the name of the repository. So what I've done for my ports is to lock all my ports to a fake repository that doesn't exist called ports. And then when I do package upgrade, the upgrade command won't poke my custom compiled ports that way. And then for updating the ports, I only have like 4, so I just do them manually. But I imagine there might be a way to do that with Portmaster, or just to query package for a list of all the ports that are locked or that are that have their repository set to ports, and then you can just feed that list to package to Portmaster instead. Plus, unless your ports tree has gotten slightly newer since your package tree, which isn't too bad anymore now that most of the package repositories are only about 2 weeks old at the maximum. You won't rebuild a bunch of your ports or a bunch of your packages because the port is newer. If it's the same version, it usually skips it unless an option is changed. I will add the commands on how to do that with package to the show notes, and you can check those out and see how you can lock a package so it won't be updated, or how to lock a specific package to a different repo and things like that.
Cool. Well, thanks, Alan. Okay, next up, we have last question this week from John. He's back with another update. So he had written a couple weeks ago about FreeNAS, and he let us know he had submitted a bug for the connectivity issues that has been tagged for 922. Yep. And he provides the link, which we'll have in the show notes.
Yeah, so he wrote a question in a couple weeks ago where he was having a problem where his network would pause for like 30 seconds or something. And he apparently got that resolved, and it will be fixed when FreeNAS 922 comes out.
Cool. He also says he has all his gear now. So he lists, some Intel processor, Kingston memory, Supermicro motherboard, Cool Master case, etc. He says he cannot recommend to the other viewers strongly enough to do your actual hardware homework first. Follow the recommendations and guides on the forums. This machine is actually tangibly faster when opening a share on another machine. It's instantaneous. His Xbox Media Center starts playing movies instantly. SSH stays open as long as he wants them to. So that's pretty cool. He says he contacted IX Systems for the parts. Their service standard and response times were amazing, but they would only provide the complete machine, which was a great price. But since he already had the case and hard drives, etc., he decided to go the individual parts from eBay. Yep. So he also gives us thanks to us, and then also to Cyberjock and Deucen in the FreeNAS forums for all the help and advice. So he says they are tireless helpers of the sick and lame. That is cool. It's been a journey, an exciting educational one. Every time I walk past the FreeNAS box and hear its gentle hum, I get a feeling of satisfaction that I know it is so well that all my plugins and stuff just do their stuff. I don't even need to check on it. He trusts it to do its thing. So he now loiters on the forums and tries to hit the lower level posts on topic he's now familiar with, which will allow the pros to focus on the bigger stuff so he can try and give back. So that is really cool. He says, thanks again. Keep up with the great show. And he gives a shout out to Colin Percival, who was such an interesting guest. Yeah. So that was cool. Thanks for getting back to us.
I think that's really good advice. Is like do the hardware homework first, and usually it's easier to just let IX build you the system.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, because then it's definitely going to work, and you'll have someone to get help from if it has problems. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you build it yourself, as someone who's built it, I built all the servers at Scale Engine, the original ones, myself, and. There was always this trepidation. All right, we built this, and then, this RAID card, even though it says really on the box that it works with FreeBSD, they only provide binary drivers for FreeBSD 8, and I want to use 9 because it has newer ZFS. And if I had just gone to IX, that wouldn't have had that problem. And that's why
I would have told you that ahead of time.
And that is why we buy all of our servers from IX now. Cool. And then we convince them to sponsor the show. But if you're looking for a machine, it's ixsystems.com/BSD Now. And you can also pick up the FreeNAS mini boxes on Amazon. So you can all the awesomeness you're used to with Amazon, except you can get your system from IX directly over Amazon.
Yeah, you literally just unpack it and plug it into the network and don't look at it again. Exactly. I mean, that's how mine worked.
It's a real appliance. Yep.
It's pretty cool. Okay. Well, that's our feedback and questions for the week. So as usual, we'll remind you that all these tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv.
So as Chris was saying, the SSH tutorial on the website has been updated for the new 6.5 version, which includes the new key algorithm and stuff. Yep. And if you have any questions, comments, show ideas, and stories, you can send them in at feedback at freebsdnow.tv. Mm-hmm.
And as usual, watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC. Also, we want to mention, as a reminder, if you're still on FreeBSD 8.3 for some reason, please upgrade soon. It's reaching its end of life, so you'll want to be aware of that.
Yeah, you can do a simple upgrade to 8.4, which won't require changing any of your packages or anything, so it'll just, it's like a 5-minute upgrade. With FreeBSD-update. Thank you, Colin Percival. Or you can upgrade to FreeBSD 9.2 or 10.0. In those cases, you'll have to upgrade your packages. But now with package NG, it's so easy, it's not really worth worrying about.
Mm-hmm. And a reminder, if you're using package.ng, there's a new 1.26 version which just came out and addresses a security issue, so please update to that.
The YAML parser had a bug, which is a library that it depends on.
So also, we get to mention the winner of the tutorial contest this week. How cool is that? So who won this week, Alan?
It was Dusko, who wrote a tutorial on using Nginx, the monitoring tool. And so he will shortly...
Oh, you mean Nagios?
Nagios, yep.
Yeah,
the monitoring
sorry.
tool. And he'll shortly be sent his pillow. And he's promised to send in a picture of it when he gets it.
Nice picture of him holding it. That'll be awesome.
Yes.
We'll put that up on the site.
Exactly.
And we'll be featuring that tutorial in a future episode. So again, congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
Please remember to send us that picture when it arrives. And Alan, I guess you got your pillow in the mail as well?
I was just showing that off.
Nice. Good deal. Well, excellent. Well, thank you guys for being with us this week. We'll look forward to being back same time next week, and hope you guys have a good weekend.